I saw my wife enter the party accompanied by another man. I knew the dress she wore well, because I was the one who bought it. The scent I smelled when she passed me was the same one I had praised the night before when we slept together as a couple. But now, there, in front of everyone, she smiled at another as if he owned her world. His hands were clasped together and his eyes shone in a way they hadn't shone for me in a long time. The shock was so great that my body refused to react in the first few seconds. I must have been dreaming. It must have been a mistake. But it wasn't. I walked towards them. My heart was beating so hard I thought I could hear its echo reverberating through the room. The air around me felt thicker, heavier, as if her betrayal were something physical, something I could touch. When I finally stopped in front of the two, the momentary silence made my blood pound in my ears. The man next to her didn't back down, nor did he hide. It was too comfortable. And she just froze for a moment before forcing a tight smile, as if she could pretend nothing was happening. As if I were just another figure in the crowd. I thought you really loved me. My voice was lower than I expected, but carried with a weight that she couldn't ignore. His eyes finally widened, betraying the fear he was trying to hide. I didn't know you were a traitor, I added, my breathing becoming increasingly difficult. Your family will know everything now. Panic flashed across his face like lightning. She turned to her lover, looking for some anchor, some salvation, but he just watched the scene, showing no regret. I just waited to see how she would get out of that situation. I could see the subtle tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat forming at the base of his neck. She tried to whisper my name, but I was no longer willing to listen. Not after the humiliation. Not after the cutting pain that ripped me apart inside. I knew something had changed between us for months. I felt his distance, his disinterest disguised in empty excuses. But I never imagined that she would have the audacity to betray me so openly. So shamelessly. At the company party. In front of attentive eyes, from people who knew me. From friends who, at that moment, wondered if I already knew, or if I was just discovering it now. If they felt sorry for me or if, deep down, they had been suspicious for a long time. The surrounding whispers became deafening. People watched as if they were watching a show. And maybe that was it. A show of betrayal. A theater where I was the only one who didn't know the script. She pursed her lips and tried to touch me, but I took a step back, as if her simple touch could burn me. Please don't do that here, his voice was a whispered plea, a pathetic attempt to keep up appearances. Don't do that here. I repeated, feeling the anger growing. You already did. You chose to do this here. Now deal with the consequences. The man next to her finally opened his mouth to speak, but before he said anything, I raised my hand. Don't you dare. You have nothing to tell me. His silence was an even greater insult. A look of superiority that made me want to rip that discreet smile off his face. He didn't care. He wasn't afraid of me. And that was the worst of all. Because that meant my wife had already made our story irrelevant. He had already won before I even understood that I was in a war. She tried to pull me away, but I was no longer her understanding husband. He was no longer the man who forgave her forgetfulness, her lame excuses, her nights when she arrived too late with the smell of another perfume permeating her clothes. The man who pretended not to see, who tried to believe in poorly told lies because the fear of losing was greater than the pain of doubt. That man died the moment I saw her enter with him. What remained was a betrayed man. A man ready to destroy everything she thought she could keep intact. You have no idea what you did, I whispered, and for the first time, she understood that it wouldn't end there. His eyes began to shine with something that looked like regret, but I didn't want that anymore. I didn't want to see a shred of remorse on his face right now. Because regret does not erase what was done. It doesn't erase the humiliation. I turned away, leaving her behind with her lover and the judgmental looks. I left the party without caring about the consequences, because the real consequence was yet to come. And it would be brutal. But what she didn't know, what no one there knew, was that her betrayal didn't just destroy our marriage. She destroyed something much bigger. Something that, until then, I thought was unshakable. And when the cards started to fall, she would understand that certain choices cannot be undone. And that a mistake, when made in front of the wrong people, can cost much more than just a wedding. And then, she would ask herself, what if she had chosen differently? What if I had thought better? But then, it would be too late. Welcome to the channel where the truth about cheating is revealed without filters. Here, we do not romanticize infidelity. On the contrary, we show its devastating consequences. All the stories are fictional, but the feelings they awaken are real. The goal? Make it clear that betrayal is never worth it and always destroys more than you imagine. Get ready for an intense story, full of twists and shocking moments. Take a deep breath, because what comes next will leave you speechless. The night was warm, and the gentle wind that came through the porch of the house brought an almost welcoming coolness. Ethan watched his wife, Olivia, as she looked in the mirror, adjusting a small, dainty earring. There was a softness to the way she did it, as if every detail of her appearance mattered more than usual. He smiled to himself. She was always careful, always so meticulous about her image, but today there seemed to be something different in her posture. A slight restlessness in the eyes, a brighter shine than normal. Maybe it was just the excitement for the company party, he thought. After all, she always liked this type of event, being surrounded by people, socializing and feeling admired. Ethan, on the other hand, has never been a big fan of these reunions. But for Olivia, he insisted on going. He liked to see her happy, he liked to hold her hand in the crowd and know that, despite all the looks, it was with him that she would return home at the end of the night. "Are you ready?" he asked, leaning against the bedroom doorframe. Olivia smiled, a sweet smile, but it faded too quickly. She ran her hand down her tight black dress, as if making sure it was perfect. "Yeah, I just need to get my bag." She looked away and turned, walking to the dressing table with controlled steps. Ethan watched that movement curiously. Something seemed out of place, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. In the car, the silence between the two wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't usual either. Normally, Olivia would talk non-stop, commenting on her coworkers, office gossip, or plans for the evening. But now, she just looked ahead, with a slight smile on her face, lost in thought. Ethan frowned. "Everything is fine?" he asked, turning to face her quickly. Olivia blinked a few times, as if coming back to reality. "Yes, of course. I'm just tired from work." He nodded, accepting the answer, but the discomfort persisted in some corner of his mind. The party took place in one of the most sophisticated halls in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting golden light off the walls. People laughed, clinked glasses of champagne and chatted animatedly. Ethan didn't know many people there, but it was the kind of environment Olivia loved. As soon as they entered, she slid her hand over his arm, keeping him close, but her eyes roamed the room with an intensity he couldn't ignore. The night continued its course, with presentations, speeches, and lots of laughter. Olivia looked stunning, and he noticed that several eyes were turning to her. It was something that always happened, but Ethan never bothered. I trusted her. He trusted the story they built together. Their relationship hadn't always been perfect, but he believed that, after so many years, there was something solid there. A love that resisted time, problems, differences. They met in college and have never been apart since. Olivia was the strong, determined woman he admired. The one who knew what she wanted and who made everything seem easy. He, on the other hand, was the type of man who valued stability, the comfort of routine. Maybe they were too different, but that never alienated them. On the contrary. The balance between them has always been what made everything work. That night, however, something inside him was beginning to shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A discomfort he couldn't name. A growing discomfort, as if he was facing something he still couldn't see. Olivia laughed, threw back her hair and touched people's arms familiarly. This was not new. But the sparkle in her eyes was a glow that he hadn't seen in a long time, and that, for some reason, made him feel a strange tightness in his chest. He walked away a little, grabbing a drink from the bar and watching her from afar. He saw how she spoke to her coworkers, how she leaned forward slightly when she laughed. She was beautiful, magnetic. It always was. And for that reason, it was always difficult for him to understand why, in recent times, it seemed that something between them had changed. The kisses weren't as intense anymore. Conversations before bed became shorter. Touches are rarer. He tried to convince himself that this was just the natural wear and tear of time, that marriages went through phases. But what if it wasn't? He shook his head, shaking off his thoughts. I was exaggerating. It was a night to have fun. There was no reason for distrust. Olivia loved him. Always loved him. He couldn't question something that had been built over so many years because of a vague and unfounded feeling. He took a deep breath and decided to join her again. But when he took his first step, he saw something that made his stomach turn. Olivia was standing near the entrance to the room, and there was a man beside her. He was looking at her in a way that made all the alarms inside Ethan go off. The kind of look a man gets when he feels in control. When you know you have some ownership over someone. Olivia was smiling, but her expression was different. It wasn't the kind of smile she gave anyone. It was a smile that seemed to carry a secret. Ethan felt his entire body stiffen. His heart raced in a way that made his chest hurt. He could be exaggerating. You could be interpreting everything wrong. But at that moment, a single certainty took over his mind: something was about to change. Something he couldn't avoid. And then, without even realizing it, he started walking towards her. With every step, I felt like I was about to cross an invisible line. A line that, once crossed, there would be no turning back. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. Ever since he saw Olivia talking to that man, his mind had given him no respite. Her laugh, the way she tilted her head to the side, the way her eyes sparkled more than they should have. It all made something inside him scream in alarm. But he refused to jump to conclusions. I needed to believe he was just being paranoid. He walked toward her, but before he could get close enough, a coworker stopped him, pulling him into a forced business conversation. Ethan tried to pay attention, forcing a polite smile, but his eyes kept returning to Olivia. She continued talking to that man, but now her expression seemed more reserved. He leaned in to say something in her ear and she bit her lower lip before looking away. Something inside Ethan tightened. He knew that gesture. It was the same thing she did when she tried to hide something. He tried to ignore the feeling that his world was about to split, but the discomfort intensified when he saw Olivia discreetly walking away towards the hallway that led to the bathrooms. The man followed soon after, and Ethan felt his blood boil. He swallowed hard, trying to convince himself that it didn't mean anything, that maybe it was just a coincidence. But his body was already moving before his mind could find any plausible explanation. He continued down the corridor, trying to keep his steps steady and his breathing under control. His heart was beating hard against his chest, as if it wanted to warn him that something irreversible was about to happen. The hallway was darker and less busy than the main hall. There were discreet doors along the way, probably support rooms for the event team. But it was when he heard a muffled murmur coming from one of the doors that his body froze. His hand shook when he touched the doorknob. The door was not completely closed. A small gap revealed part of what was happening on the other side. And then, what he saw made everything inside him crumble. Olivia was leaning against the wall, the man in front of her too close. She held his arm, as if trying to push him away, but there was no real conviction in the gesture. It was a game. A game Ethan recognized well. A game of false resistance, of denial that only existed to fuel the excitement of the moment. The man wrapped his hand around her waist, pulling her closer, and Olivia didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes were closed, her lips parted. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to invade the room at that moment, to end it before it went too far, but he was trapped there, paralyzed by the shock, the disbelief, the betrayal that was unfolding before his eyes without him being able to stop it. That's when the kiss happened. It wasn't an accidental kiss, nor was it stolen. It was intense, full of desire, and Olivia couldn't resist. She responded, wrapping her arms around the man's neck, surrendering to the moment as if nothing else existed. As if Ethan didn't exist. As if the years they spent together, all the promises, all the nights shared had been erased in a second. The pain that ripped through Ethan at that moment was not something he could describe. It was suffocating, cruel, a blow so violent that for a moment he thought he wouldn't be able to breathe. He wanted to scream, he wanted to explode, he wanted to do anything to end it. But all he managed was to walk away, staggering down the hallway as if he'd been punched in the stomach. He needed to get out of there. I needed air. The party continued as if nothing had happened, as if the world wasn't falling apart around them. People laughed, toasted, danced. No one knew that, at that moment, he had lost everything. He walked towards the exit, feeling his legs wobble with each step. The night air hit his face, but it brought no relief. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his breathing was uneven. The image of Olivia kissing another man burned in his mind. I couldn't push her away. He couldn't forget the way she gave herself up, how she seemed completely oblivious to the fact that he existed. That he loved her. That he trusted her. His stomach turned, and for a moment he thought he was going to vomit. His hands were clenched into fists, his body's muscles were tense, his anger and pain were mixing together in an uncontrollable storm. He needed to confront her. I needed to look her in the eye and ask why. But he knew that no matter how much he asked, no matter how much he sought an answer, nothing would erase what he had seen. Nothing would make it less real. And then, Olivia appeared at the exit, adjusting her dress as if nothing had happened. The man was not with her. Perhaps he had left another way, perhaps he was waiting for the situation to calm down before reappearing. But none of that mattered. Ethan walked towards her. The heart was still beating wildly, but the pain was already beginning to give way to something colder. Something he couldn't name. Olivia smiled when she saw him, as if she could still pretend that everything was normal. But before she could say anything, he looked her in the eyes, and his voice was filled with a weight that even he didn't know existed. I thought you really loved me. Her smile disappeared instantly. His eyes widened, and for a moment, fear crossed his expression. I didn't know she was a traitor. She opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't. The guilt was already there, written all over her face. And Ethan knew he didn't need anything else. What he had seen was real. What he felt was real. And nothing could change that. Your family will know everything now. The shock in her eyes was instantaneous. Panic set in, breathing quickened. She tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away, as if her touch were toxic. As if she was no longer the woman he knew. And then, as the night continued around them, as the world continued to spin, Ethan realized that this was just the beginning. That the betrayal was just the first of many revelations. And that, as much as it hurt, he still didn't know everything. I still didn't know the worst part. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The apartment felt bigger than ever, cold and empty. The silence consumed him, filled only by the repetition of the scene that played out in his mind like a cursed movie. Olivia in another man's arms. The kiss. The touch. The way she gave herself without hesitation. Every detail engraved like a scar that would never disappear. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he stared at the cell phone in his hands. There were no messages from her. No explanation, no attempt to contact. Just an emptiness that spoke louder than any excuse she could give. He got up and went to the kitchen, trying to swallow the bitterness in his throat. His fingers gripped the cup with more force than necessary. He wanted to break something, scream, vent the anger that mixed with the pain. But all he could do was take a deep breath and face reality. This wasn't a nightmare. This was his life now. Hours passed before he decided to leave. I needed answers. He needed to look into her eyes and understand what brought him to this point. He arrived home early in the morning, and found Olivia sitting on the couch, her hands shaking around a cup of coffee. His face was pale, his eyes red from crying. He felt a tightness in his chest, but he didn't back away. No more. Why? His voice was firm, but filled with deep tiredness. Olivia swallowed hard and looked away. Ethan, Don't give me empty excuses, he cut off, approaching. I want the truth. All of it. She pursed her lips, her hands shaking even more. Then, as if something inside her finally gave way, she set the cup aside and faced him, her eyes shining with a fear he had never seen before. You don't understand, his voice broke. This wasn't just a mistake, it was something that was out of my control. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. Did it get out of hand? Did you cheat on me because you lost control? Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, as if she needed the strength to continue. When he spoke again, his voice was a heavy whisper. It's not just about us, Ethan, it's about everything that's about to happen. He frowned. What are you talking about? Olivia hesitated, biting her lip like she was about to destroy the world itself. But then, as if there was no way out, she blurted out the truth. That man, he wasn't just with me. He's involved with your company. And now, after what happened, he has what he needs to destroy you. Ethan's heart stopped for a second. The room seemed to spin. What did you do? His voice was low, almost a threat. He's one of the investors in the project you're managing. But he didn't get into it for business. He wanted a way to reach you, and I was that way. Ethan felt his entire body go cold. You mean this was all planned? Olivia nodded slowly, tears falling down her face. At first, I didn't know. He approached me as someone interested in the project, and I was taken by the situation. But when I realized what was happening, it was too late. He already knew everything about us, about you, about your decisions within the company. And now he's going to use it against you. Ethan took a step back, feeling the ground disappear beneath his feet. You betrayed me and even handed over information that could destroy me professionally. I tried to stop. She begged, moving closer, but he held up his hand so she wouldn't come any closer. But he threatened me, Ethan. He said if I didn't continue, he would do anything to ruin you. Ethan's gaze hardened. The pain he felt now was mixed with something darker. And you chose to save yourself. The guilt on Olivia's face was evident. I thought I could control it. I thought I could find a way to keep him from harming you. But he couldn't. She shook her head, defeated. No. Silence settled between the two, heavy, suffocating. Ethan felt every part of his body filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. It wasn't just the pain of knowing Olivia had slept with another man. It was the certainty that she had been an accomplice in something much bigger. Something that could cost him everything he built. He has proof, Ethan. Messages, records, and now, after the party, he has a perfect story to tell. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. But all he could see was the image of Olivia in the arms of another. All I could feel was the bitter taste of betrayal. So what do I do now? His voice was cold. Olivia sobbed but didn't respond. Because deep down, they both knew. He was alone in this. And now, he had to decide whether he would let his world fall apart, or whether he would fight to take down those who tried to destroy it. The only thing he was sure of was that Olivia was no longer part of this fight. She had already chosen her side. Ethan felt an unbearable weight in his chest. Olivia's silence, her lowered gaze, the guilt dripping from her face, all of that only confirmed what he already knew: there was no going back. He tried to look for some trace of the woman he loved, some proof that she was still the same, but all he saw was a stranger. A person who had made her choice and was now here, waiting for him to forgive her or to somehow find a way to minimize the destruction he caused. But there was no way to minimize it. What she did went beyond any limit. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a betrayal in every possible way. He took a deep breath and looked around. The room was dark, lit only by the first lights of dawn. The dining table, where they had had coffee together so many times, now seemed like a distant scene from a life that no longer existed. The picture frames around the house seemed to mock him, filled with false memories, of moments that now seemed like cruel jokes. He needed to get out of there. The air was too heavy, suffocating. Olivia noticed his movement and stood up quickly, as if she could stop the inevitable. "Ethan, please, I know I made a mistake, but I didn't want it to be like this." His voice was brittle, but he no longer felt anything. He raised his hand, asking for silence. "Don't say anything else." His voice was firm, controlled, but inside him there was a storm. "You had time to think. You had time to choose. And you chose this. You chose to lie, you chose to destroy me." Her eyes filled with tears, but he could no longer care. She tried to get closer, but he backed away. "You don't understand, Ethan. I was threatened. He pressured me. He said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't give him the information he wanted, he would find another way to destroy you. So instead of trusting me, instead of fighting me, you handed everything to him on a plate." He laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "That wasn't a slip, Olivia. That was a plan. That was betrayal. Not just against me, but against everything we've built." She sobbed, tears falling down her face. "I thought I could stop it before it was too late. I thought I could manipulate the situation without anything happening to you." "Manipulate?" Ethan repeated in disbelief. "Did you really think you could play both sides and get away with it?" Olivia lowered her head, unable to look at him. He felt a deep tiredness take over him. There was nothing more to say. She couldn't undo what she did. There was no excuse that could erase that. Without another word, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The street was cold, the air cut into his skin, but he didn't even feel it. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from anger. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts racing, trying to understand what to do next. Olivia betrayed him body and soul. The man who ruined his marriage now had everything he needed to destroy him professionally. And all he could do was wait for the final blow or act before it was too late. He picked up his cell phone, hesitated for a moment, and then made the only call that mattered at that moment. "I need an urgent meeting. Now." Minutes later, Ethan was in a discreet cafe, away from the eyes of the city. Sitting in front of him was David, one of his trusted partners. The man looked at him seriously, immediately realizing that something was wrong. "You look like a man who's about to explode," David commented, crossing his arms. "What happened?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "I was betrayed." David frowned. "Betrayed how? Are we talking about personal or professional betrayal?" "Both," Ethan replied, and saw his friend lean forward, interested. "Explain." Ethan told everything, from the moment he saw Olivia with that man to the complete revelation of the betrayal and scam that was about to happen against him. With each word, I saw David's face grow darker. "This is serious, Ethan. If this guy really has inside information about the company, he could ruin us. Depending on what he has, he could cause investors to walk away, he could accuse us of fraud, even file lawsuits against us. Ethan ran his hands over his face, feeling the weight of the situation. I know. And I can't just wait for him to do it. I need to reverse this before he acts. David was silent for a moment, thoughtful. Then, his expression changed. What if we do this first? Ethan stared at him. What do you mean? If this guy is blackmailing you, he needs you to have no time to react. He wants you to be caught off guard. But what if we act first? What if we turn the situation around before he has the chance to launch the scam? Ethan felt a spark of hope light up amidst the chaos. Do you think we can? David smiled, but it was a calculating smile. It depends on what exactly he has. But we know a lot of influential people. And you still have a clean name. We can turn the tide before he can harm you. For the first time that hellish night, Ethan felt like he still had control over something. That there was still a chance to get out of this without losing everything. Then let's do this, he said, and the determination in his voice made David nod. Let's take this guy down before he has a chance to take you down. Ethan left the cafe feeling like, for the first time, he had a plan. He still needed to deal with the pain, with the anger, with Olivia's betrayal. But that could wait. First, he needed to save himself. He needed to stop his life from being completely destroyed. And above all, he needed to ensure that those who betrayed him paid for every wrong choice they made. Ethan knew that every step from then on needed to be calculated. There was no more room for error, for hesitation. He was about to enter a war he didn't choose, but which was now his only option. Olivia's betrayal destroyed him emotionally, but what that man tried to do to his company could ruin everything he's built. He couldn't allow it. His heart beat with a different intensity, a mix of cold anger and a need for justice that he had never felt before. David was already gathering information. Ethan trusted him, he knew he was one of the few who really was on his side. But there was a part inside him that was still trying to process everything. The woman he loved, the one he had shared his life with, had been capable of something so low. It wasn't just the fact that she had slept with another man. It was the fact that she consciously chose to betray not just her marriage, but her trust, her career, her dignity. And now, when he tried to keep his head straight, he still felt her words echoing in his mind. He was sitting in the office when his cell phone rang. Olivia. He stared at the name on the screen for a few seconds before answering. His voice was low, almost hesitant. Ethan, can we talk? I have nothing more to talk to you about. Please, listen to me, just for a moment. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. You have 2 minutes. I know I made a mistake, I know nothing I say can change what happened, but I don't want him to destroy you. The laugh that escaped Ethan's lips was bitter. Now do you worry? I never wanted it to come to this. I never wanted you to end up hurt like this. I got too involved, I made the wrong choices, and now I'm stuck with this. Pray. His voice hardened. You had a chance to leave before this blew up. You could have told me, you could have prevented all of this. But no. You stayed. You played this game with him and now you want me to believe you're sorry. I am. But I can't change what's already happened. I can only try to stop it from getting worse. Ethan gripped his cell phone tightly. And how do you intend to do that? He trusts me. If I get close to him and get the evidence he has against you, maybe I can stop him from using it against you. A heavy silence fell between the two. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of what was being offered. And what do you want in return? Olivia hesitated. I just want to fix this. I want to prove to you that, despite everything, I'm not the monster you see now. He ran his hand over his face, feeling the conflict rising within him. Should he trust her once again? She had lied before. He had already made his choice. But now, she was handing him a possible solution. "I can't trust you," he said finally. "I know," Olivia whispered. "But you can trust that he underestimates me. I was foolish enough to let myself be manipulated by him, but he thinks he still controls me. Maybe I can turn the tables on him before he realizes." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He was on the verge of a decision that could define everything. He knew letting Olivia act was a risk, but he also knew he needed an advantage. "If you do this," he began, "it's not about me. Don't think it will erase what you did." "I know," she replied, and then hung up. Ethan stood still, looking at his cell phone as if it could give him answers. He knew that what was about to happen could be even more dangerous. But there were no more easy choices. He needed to be ahead before it was too late. That same night, David called saying he had obtained important information. The man behind it all had a history of blackmail and manipulation. He had brought down other companies before, always approaching someone influential and exploiting their weaknesses. Olivia had been just another pawn in his game. Ethan met with David in a discreet office, away from prying eyes. He listened attentively to every detail of what they had discovered. The man's network of contacts was extensive, but he was not untouchable. "If Olivia gets the evidence, we have a real chance of taking him down before he acts," David concluded. Ethan ran his hand over his chin, thoughtfully. "But how can we be sure that she will actually do this?" David let out a heavy sigh. "We can't. But she has more to lose now. If he falls, so does she." Ethan stared at the wall in front of him, feeling the weight of everything on his shoulders. He never thought it would get to this point. You never imagined that you would need to fight to keep your reputation, your company, your entire life intact because of the person who was supposed to be your partner. The clock was almost midnight and he received a new message from Olivia. A single word, "I did it." Ethan's body tensed. Now everything depended on what came next. Ethan stared at his cell phone screen, his gaze fixed on the message Olivia had sent. "I achieved." 2 syllables that could mean your salvation or your ruin. He didn't know how much he could trust her, not after everything that had happened, but he also knew he didn't have many options. If she had actually obtained the evidence against the man who tried to destroy him, then it could be the missing piece to turn the tide. David entered the room and noticed the tension on Ethan's face. Without saying anything, she pulled out a chair and sat down, waiting for him to speak first. "She said she got it," Ethan finally blurted out, throwing his cell phone onto the table. David arched his eyebrow. "And you believe her?" Ethan let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. But if it's true, we can act before he has the chance to use anything against me." David crossed his arms, thoughtful. "We need to see what she has before we decide anything. We can't trust her blindly." "I know," Ethan agreed. Minutes later, the cell phone vibrated again. Another message. An address and a time. Olivia wanted to meet him in person. David shook his head, clearly suspicious. This could be a trap. "If it is, I'll find out," Ethan replied, standing up. "But I need to go." David hesitated, then nodded. "I'll go with you. We don't risk this alone." Ethan didn't argue. He knew he needed someone by his side if something went wrong. The underground parking lot was poorly lit, creating strange shadows on the concrete walls. Olivia was leaning against the hood of a black car, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected someone to be watching them. When Ethan approached, she straightened but didn't take a step forward. She just looked at him with a mixture of guilt and tiredness. "You came," she said, her voice low. "Do you have what you promised?" He ignored any formalities. Olivia nodded and opened her bag, taking out a flash drive and an envelope with papers. "Here is the evidence. Conversation records, bank transfers, forged contracts. He used my proximity to you to get information, but he also used other people within the company. I managed to track who he bought from to get this data. Ethan took the documents and the flash drive, handing everything to David, who started checking right then and there. Olivia watched nervously, as if expecting something to happen at any moment. If this is real, David muttered as he analyzed the files, we have something solid enough to take him down before he does anything to you. Olivia swallowed. He doesn't know I took it. But he'll realize it soon. Ethan crossed his arms, his expression hard. And what do you want me to do with this information? Olivia hesitated, looking away. I want you to finish him off before he destroys me too. Ethan felt a bitter taste in his mouth. So now you want my help? I have nowhere to run, Ethan. She looked at him, her voice filled with despair. I know I did everything wrong. I know I hurt you, that I betrayed you in every way possible. But he used me. And now, if he finds out that I turned on him, he won't stop until he destroys me too. David looked at Ethan, waiting for him to make the decision. Ethan studied Olivia for a long moment. She was scared, vulnerable, but still, part of him couldn't feel sorry. All of that was the result of the choices she made. He had no obligation to save her. I'm going to finish him off, he finally said. But not for you. I'm going to do this because he tried to destroy me. And no one does that without consequences. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, relieved. I understand. Ethan took a step back, still keeping his distance. After that, you and I are done for good. She nodded slowly, her face dark. I know. David kept the documents and the flash drive in the inside pocket of his jacket. Let's get out of here. We have work to do. Ethan turned and started walking back to the car without looking back. He knew Olivia was still there, watching him leave. But he didn't feel the need to look at her again. She was no longer part of his life. The dawn progressed quickly as Ethan and David met with lawyers and trusted contacts. The evidence that Olivia had obtained was more than enough to dismantle the entire blackmail operation of the man who tried to destroy him. Within hours, legal action was taken, and in less than a day, the man's name began to be formally investigated. The news spread quickly. Mid-morning, Ethan received information that the man's company had been placed under suspicion, and his assets began to be frozen. It was the beginning of the end. And then, just when everything seemed to be falling into place, Ethan's phone rang again. Era Olivia. This time, his voice was thick with panic. Ethan, he found out. He felt his body stiffen. What do you mean by that? He knows it was me. I'm scared. Ethan pressed the cell phone to his ear, feeling the tension build. Tell me where you are. I'm home, but I think he's watching me. Ethan stood up immediately, grabbing his car keys. David looked at him seriously. Are you sure you want to go there? Ethan hesitated for a second. He shouldn't care. Olivia made her choice. But no matter how much he tried to ignore it, he was still a man with principles. I just need to make sure he doesn't do anything to her, he said, leaving. David sighed and followed him. When they arrived at Olivia's house, Ethan immediately noticed something was wrong. The lights were off, and the front door was ajar. His heart sped up. He approached slowly, feeling adrenaline taking over his body. When he entered, he found Olivia sitting on the floor, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan. He knelt beside her. He was here. She nodded, her lips trembling. He said I would pay dearly. That if I thought you had won, I was wrong. Ethan clenched his fists. Where is he now? I don't know. David entered the house, checking to see if anyone else was there. I think he already is. But if he threatened Olivia directly, that means he's desperate. Ethan stood up, feeling anger boiling. He wasn't going to let this go. He already lost, and now he's just trying to get revenge, David said. That means it's only a matter of time before he collapses completely. Ethan looked at Olivia. His face was stained with tears, his body was shaking slightly. But he couldn't forget that she betrayed him. He took a step back, taking a deep breath. I've already done more for you than I should. She looked at him, her eyes full of sadness. I know. David touched Ethan's shoulder. Come on. He can't harm you anymore. Ethan nodded and left the house without looking back. Now, justice was done. And Olivia. Olivia would have to deal with the consequences of her own choices. Ethan walked through the streets feeling the weight of the last few days on his shoulders. The smell of the night was different, or perhaps it was the smell that had changed. Everything seemed distant, as if the world around him had lost some of its clarity. The busy streets, the lights of the cars, the people coming and going without knowing that, at that moment, he had closed a chapter of his life. There was nothing else to do. He had fought back, knocked down those who tried to destroy him. But no matter how much he had won, there was something inside him that would never be the same again. Betrayal hadn't just taken away their marriage. She had taken a piece of him. David met him at the bar where they had arranged. Ethan took a sip of his whiskey before looking at his friend. It's done, David said, pushing his cell phone onto the table. Ethan picked up the device and saw the headline plastered across all the news portals. The man who tried to destroy it had been arrested. The financial scandals had come to light, the network of corruption had been exposed. He was no longer a threat. Ethan threw his cell phone on the table, letting out a sigh. Then it's over. David nodded. For him, yes. But what about you? Ethan glanced at the cup, swirling the amber liquid before responding. I still don't know. The truth was that he was free, but he didn't know what to do with that freedom. For years, his life revolved around marriage, work, blind trust in a woman who never existed in the way he imagined. Now, he was alone, and for the first time, he felt like that wasn't a bad thing. It was an opportunity. Olivia, on the other hand, faced a very different reality. With the collapse of the scheme, she was left behind. The man she got involved with was now in prison, and her reputation was dragged along with him. His name was linked to the scandal, even if unofficially. The company she worked for didn't want to get involved and fired her without hesitation. All of his professional contacts have moved away. Friends disappeared. His family, embarrassed, cut ties. She tried calling Ethan a few times, but he never answered. There was nothing more to be said. She lost the right to try to fix something that was already dead. With no options, he left the city. She left without a clear destination, trying to rebuild her life somewhere where no one knew who she was, where she didn't have to carry the weight of her mistakes in everyone's eyes. But deep down, he knew he would never escape what he did. Guilt was a shadow that would never leave her. Ethan, in turn, made a decision. He would not be defined by what happened. He deserved something new. Something true. And that's how, months later, on a business trip, he met someone who wasn't connected to his past. Someone who didn't look at him with pity, but with genuine interest. He allowed himself to feel again, allowed himself to believe that love still existed. When he returned home, he felt for the first time that empty space no longer suffocated him. He looked in the mirror and saw a man who survived the worst and came out stronger. The weight of betrayal did not define him. It was just a scar. And scars exist to remind us that we were hurt, but also to prove that we survived. Now, everything was in the past. Olivia made her choice. Ethan did his. And life moved on, as it always does. If you've made it this far, leave your opinion on this story in the comments. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Do you think Olivia deserved forgiveness? We want to know your vision. Subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. And remember, betrayal never leads to anything but destruction. Until next time.